Good morning. Today's class is about tumors of liver and gallbladder. The topics which I am going to cover are classification of hepatic tumors, etiology, morphology, and clinical features of hepatic tumors, followed by diseases of gallbladder like gallstones and cholecystitis. Hepatic masses may come to attention due to a variety of reasons. Sometimes patients can present with history of epigastric fullness and discomfort. In some cases, they can be diagnosed on routine physical examination and radiographic studies which are done for some other indications. Coming to classification of primary hepatic tumors, they are broadly classified into benign and malignant tumors. Under benign tumors, we have hepatocellular adenoma, biliary tumors like bile duct adenoma, and mesodermal tumors, for example, hemangioma. Coming to the primary malignant tumors, the most common one is the hepatocellular carcinoma, followed by cholangiocarcinoma arising from the biliary tract, and then malignant tumor of mesodermal origin, for example, angiosarcoma. So, the broad classification of primary hepatic tumors is into benign and malignant tumors. So, coming to the benign neoplasms, one of the commonest benign neoplasm which is seen in the liver is cavernous hemangioma. So, this is a benign blood vessel tumor. So, grossly it can appear as a discrete red-blue soft nodule, usually less than 2 centimeters in diameter. On microscopy, the tumor consists of vascular channels in a bed of fibrous connective tissue. Then the second one is a hepatocellular adenoma. This is again a very rare tumor. It's a benign neoplasm developing from hepatocytes, especially occurs in women of reproductive age group in association with use of oral contraceptives. So they may be detected incidentally with abdominal imaging or following hemorrhagic necrosis when the lesion outstrips its blood supply. So this is again a very rare tumor. So now coming to the malignant liver tumors. So 99% of the malignant liver tumors are metastatic. That is, they occur as a secondary deposits, especially from primary tumors of portal vein drained organs. So like how lung is one of the common site for the metastatic tumors. Similarly, liver also forms one of the common site for metastatic tumors. So primary liver malignancies are hepatocellular carcinomas, and then which arise in the background of already very serious liver disorders. Then third malignant tumor of the liver will be cholangiocarcinoma. These are the carcinomas which arise from the intrahepatic bile ducts, and they look more like a adenocarcinoma than to hepatomas. So malignant liver tumors can be either secondaries or the metastatic deposits of primary elsewhere, and then primary liver malignancy as such is a hepatocellular carcinoma arising from hepatocytes, or it could be a cholangiocarcinoma arising from the bile ducts. Now coming to hepatocellular carcinoma. The other name is a hepatoma. It is a malignant tumor which derives from the hepatocytes and is the most common primary malignant tumor of the liver. Coming to the incidence, it is more common in males than in females, and the peak incidence usually occurs in the 5th to 6th decades, but it can occur a decade or two earlier if the incidence of HBV and HCV is higher in that particular area. And in about 70 to 80% of cases, it occurs in a liver which is already affected by the cirrhosis. Now coming to the etiopathogenesis of hepatocellular carcinoma. Chronic liver disease are the most common predisposing conditions for the hepatoma. So most important underlying factors in carcinogenesis of hepatoma are viral infections, for example, hepatitis B virus and hepatitis C virus. Prolonged infection by these hepatitis B virus, it is linked either directly or epidemiologically to the genesis of hepatocellular carcinoma. So there are certain evidences in favor of this, like incidence of hepatitis HBs AG positivity, that is a surface antigen, is higher in hepatoma patients. And also 95% of the African and Asian patients of hepatoma, they have anti-HBC. And lastly, there is evidence of integration of HBV DNA genome in the genome of the hepatoma tumor cells. So all these factors show evidence in favor of the hepatitis B and hepatitis C infection as one of the etiologic factors for hepatocellular carcinoma. And the next risk factor is alcoholic cirrhosis. So cirrhosis again of all etiological types is commonly associated with hepatoma. Especially the macronodular postnecrotic cirrhosis is the most frequently associated one. And here again, pathogenesis is attributed to chronic regenerative activity in cirrhosis or the vulnerability of an already damaged liver by cirrhosis to other carcinogenic influences. And also one more factor which is in favor of cirrhosis as etiologic factor is 60% of the cirrhotic liver shows liver cell dysplasia. And the next risk factor is alcohol. Alcoholics are at 4 times risk of developing hepatoma as compared to the normal persons. Then alcohol per se is not a hepatic carcinogen, but it can act as a co-carcinogen with the hepatitis B virus. The next one is aflatoxin B, which is a mycotoxin. So this is a fungal contaminant of many food items, especially groundnuts. So this is produced by the Aspergillus flavus and it is again a carcinogenic. It may act as a co-carcinogen with hepatitis B or may suppress the cellular immune response. And then we have chemical carcinogens like butter yellow and nitrosamines, which are the food additives. And some of the chemical carcinogens, these chemical carcinogens can also induce hepatoma. So there are other miscellaneous etiological factors like hereditary hemochromatosis, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. So the most important etiological factors are chronic hepatic infections like hepatitis B and C, then cirrhosis, alcoholism, and aflatoxin B. Now coming to the gross appearance of hepatocellular carcinoma. They appear grossly as soft hemorrhagic tan masses in the liver. They can either appear as a single or a multiple mass. So this is the gross appearance. And then coming to the histologic pattern again, they can vary from a well differentiated tumor which is difficult to distinguish from the normal liver to an anaplastic or an undifferentiated appearance. So this slide shows a single massive tumor nodule of hepatocellular carcinoma which is surrounded by the normal adjacent liver. Or it can grossly appear as a multifocal tumor which is made up of nodules of variable size, or sometimes it can be a diffusely infiltrative lesion. So next, coming to the microscopic appearance of hepatocellular carcinoma. So microscopically, the tumor cells resemble hepatocytes. Cytologically, there is a wide range of differentiation from tumor to tumor. So they can be either well differentiated, wherein the tumor cells resemble the hepatocytes having vesicular nuclei, or sometimes cytologically they can be highly anaplastic and difficult to distinguish them as a hepatocytic origin. And the tumor cells can show pleomorphism with bizarre spindle cells and multinucleate tumor giant cells. So coming to the patterns of growth patterns of these hepatocytes, the tumor cells can be arranged in four histological patterns. The first one is based on the arrangement of tumor cells. There are four histological patterns. So first one is the trabecular or the sinusoidal pattern, which is the most common one. So they here the tumor cells are arranged as 2 to 8 cell width wide trabeculae, which are composed of tumor cells separated by vascular spaces or endothelium lined sinusoids. The second pattern is the pseudoglandular or acina pattern, wherein there are central cystic space formed by degeneration and breakdown in the solid trabeculae, which are surrounded by the tumor cells. So they give a pseudo appearance of a glandular structure. Third pattern is the compact pattern, wherein there are large solid masses composed of tumor cells separated by inconspicuous sinusoids. And the last one is the Skirrus pattern, wherein there is abundant fibrous stroma separating the tumor cells. So here again, in hepatocellular carcinoma, invasion of the veins in the portal tract is a frequent finding. So here is a hepatocellular carcinoma with a typical trabecular pattern of growth. And the next one shows the pseudo-acina pattern, wherein you can see in the central portion the cystic space is formed by the degeneration and breakdown of the hepatocellular tumor cells. The third one shows clusters of the solid clusters of the tumor cells, which are separated by the sinusoids. So this is again a compact pattern of hepatocellular carcinoma. So coming to the spread of the tumor, it can give rise to intrahepatic metastasis by either vascular invasion or direct extension. So they appear as small satellite tumor nodules around the larger primary mass, or else it can give rise to hematogenous metastasis, especially to the lungs, which occurs in the later stages of the disease. And sometimes it can give rise to a long snake-like mass of tumor which invade the portal vein. So this mass can extend along the inferior vena cava, and sometimes it can even extend into the right side of the heart. In hepatocellular carcinoma as such, lymph node metastasis is a less common route. So the most common spread can be intrahepatic metastasis, or it can be hematogenous metastasis, especially to the lungs. So coming to the diagnosis of hepatocellular carcinoma, ultrasonography helps in identifying the distinctive nodules, and sometimes we can go ahead with computed tomography, CT scan and MRI with vascular or contrast studies. So apart from that, serum AFP level is elevated, and this is quite specific. So very high levels of AFP are observed in most of the cases of HCC, but it lacks a sensitivity because elevated AFP can also be found in other conditions like cirrhosis and chronic hepatitis. So the important diagnostic procedure here is the liver biopsy, which can be either a core or fine needle biopsy of the tumor. So when examined under microscope, we'll be able to give a diagnosis of hepatocellular carcinoma. Next, we can perform immunohistochemistry on the paraffin block. Hepatocellular carcinoma cells, they stain positively with AFP, HEPA1, EMA and keratin. Coming to the clinical features, most patients, they present with ill-defined upper abdominal pain or other vague symptoms. Sometimes they can present with an abdominal mass. So usually these clinical features are masked by the underlying conditions like cirrhosis or chronic hepatitis. And the main cause of death will be because of rupture of the tumor with catastrophic bleeding or as a complication of cirrhosis. So coming to another morphological variant of hepatocellular carcinoma, which is called as fibrolamellar carcinoma. So this particular tumor occurs more commonly in young male and female adults above 20 to 40 years of age, and they have no association with cirrhosis or other risk factors as compared to the hepatocellular carcinoma. So grossly, they appear as a single large, hard, scirrhous tumor with fibrous bands coursing through it. So it is the formation of these fibrous bands which gives rise to this hard consistency of the tumor. When examined under microscope, the tumor is composed of well-differentiated eosinophilic polygonal cells, which are also called as oncocytes, arranged in nests or cords separated by parallel lamellae of dense collagen bundles. So this tumor as such has a better prognosis. So first slide is about the gross appearance, wherein it is a resected specimen of the liver showing a well demarcated nodule, and microscopically you can see there are clusters of the oncocytes, that is the tumor cells, with eosinophilic polygonal cells which are arranged in the form of nests and cords, and they are separated by abundant lamellae of collagen bands. So this is the one which gives rise to its name, that's why it is called as a fibrolamellar carcinoma. Coming to the next malignant tumor, that is cholangiocarcinoma. This is the second most common hepatic malignant tumor after HCC. It's a malignancy of the biliary tree arising from bile ducts either within or outside of the liver. So it can be either extrahepatic cholangiocarcinomas or intrahepatic cholangiocarcinomas. Grossly, these tumors appear as firm grey nodules within the bile duct wall, and some may cause a diffuse infiltrative lesions. And the microscopically, cholangiocarcinomas are typical adenocarcinomas, and they often produce mucin. So most of them are well to moderately differentiated one with clearly defined glandular or the tubular structures which are lined by the pleomorphic malignant epithelial cells. So till now I have spoken about the primary hepatic malignant tumors. So now coming to the secondary hepatic tumors, that is nothing but the metastatic deposits in the liver. They are the blood-borne metastasis, and the frequent primary tumors which metastasize to the liver are tumors of stomach, breast, lungs, then colon, followed by esophagus, pancreas, malignant melanoma, and hematopoietic malignancies. So grossly, these metastatic carcinomas, they form multiple spherical nodular masses which are of variable size, Liver is usually enlarged and heavy, and these tumor deposits appear as white, well demarcated, soft or hemorrhagic masses. And the surface of the liver as such shows characteristic amplification due to central necrosis of nodular masses. And when examined under microscope, the microscopic appearances, the metastatic tumors, they generally reproduce the structure of the primary lesions. For example, if it is a metastasis from the adenocarcinoma of the stomach, then it will have the similar features as the primary tumor in the stomach. So just to summarize the hepatic tumors, we can broadly classify them into benign and the malignant tumors. Benign tumors are rare, and the most common benign tumor is a cavernous hemangioma of the liver. Coming to the malignant tumors, 99% of the tumors mainly are metastatic deposits from the primary of stomach, colon, breast, etc. And the primary malignant tumors of the liver are hepatocellular carcinoma, followed by cholangiocarcinoma, and a variant of hepatocellular carcinoma is a fibrolamellar carcinoma, which has got a good prognosis. And coming to the next topic about the gallbladder diseases. The gallbladder is a thin elongated sac about 8 cm long, and this occupies the inferior surface of the liver. The primary function of the gallbladder is the storage, concentration and release of the bile. So cholelithiasis is nothing but the presence of gallstones within the lumen of the gallbladder or in the extrahepatic biliary tree. Gallstones as such, they are frequently asymptomatic, but they can also cause mild to severe pain, which is called as biliary colic, especially when there is impaction of these stones in the cystic duct or in the common bile duct. So coming to the risk factors for formation of the gallstones. So certain populations, they are far more prone to develop gallstones. For example, it is more prevalent in Asians more than the Western population, and it is more common in the rural than the urban. It is when it comes to the age, it is again more common in the middle to older age group and occurs more commonly in the females. This again may be related. So the gallstones are usually formed from the main constituents of the bile, that is the cholesterol, bile pigments and calcium salts. So it can occur mainly in case of biliary infection, that is in case of cholecystitis, or it can be due to it is more common in some gastrointestinal disorders like ileal diseases, for example Crohn's disease or ileal resection or the bypass. So this is any disorder or it can occur in any disorders where there is hypersecretion of the biliary cholesterol. So when there is increased estrogen exposure through oral contraceptive use and also during pregnancy, there is increased in excretion of the hepatic lipoproteins and expression of the hepatic lipoprotein receptors, which increases the cholesterol uptake and synthesis. So that's why occurs more commonly in females. And similarly in obesity, again it is associated with increased biliary cholesterol secretion. This predisposes to the development of the cholesterol gallstones. So coming to the other risk factors, it can be it is more common in case of some hemolytic disorders like sickle cell anemia and thalassemia. This predisposes to the development of the pigment stones. Pigment stones, which are a complex mixture of unconjugated bilirubin along with the inorganic calcium salts. So because in these hemolytic disorders there is elevated levels of unconjugated bilirubin in the bile. So this is the one which causes which is responsible for the formation of the pigment stones. And also in case of ileal bypass or dysfunction, there is interruption in the enterohepatic circulation of the bile, and that is the reason why they are more predisposed to develop the gallstones. So cholesterol gallstones can appear more commonly in any conditions where there is hypersecretion of the cholesterol. So coming to the pathogenesis of cholesterol stones, normally cholesterol is insoluble, but it is made soluble by combining with the bile salts. So but when the cholesterol is amount of the cholesterol is is in excess, the capacity of the bile to solubilize the cholesterol is exceeded. So there is supersaturation. So cholesterol aggregates into solid cholesterol monohydrate crystals. So that is the reason why cholesterol stones are formed. And also another factor is whenever there is hypomotility of the gallbladder, that again is one of the risk factors for developing the gallstones. So factors which predispose to gallstones can be described by an old saying that gallstones are common in 4 F's, that is, which is an acronym for fat, fertile, that is a multipara women, female of 40 years. So gallstones are more common in females who are in the So coming to the cholesterol stones again, these are the main risk factors. This list shows the risk factors especially for the cholesterol stones. And the next one, this is the pigment stones. Here again there are a few risk factors for development of the pigment stones. So pathogenesis of gallstones as such, again it is a multifactorial process. So bile formation mainly occurs in the liver, and if the bile contains excess cholesterol or if it is deficient in the bile acids, then the bile becomes supersaturated with cholesterol. And again, estrogens will increase the hepatic secretion of cholesterol and decrease the secretion of bile acids. And other local factors which facilitate the formation of the gallstones are decreased gallbladder motility, which will favor the stasis and accumulation of the sludge inside the gallbladder. And also for pigment stones as such, increased hemolysis is a predisposing factor. Coming to the types of gallstones, based on the composition of the gallstones, they are classified into pure gallstones, mixed gallstones, and combined gallstones. Pure gallstones again are divided into 3 types according to the component of the bile which forms them. They are cholesterol stones, bilirubin pigment stones, calcium carbonate stones. Mixed gallstones, they are the most common one, which is seen in about 80% of the cases. They contain cholesterol monohydrate plus an admixture of calcium salts, bile pigments, and fatty acids, and the main component is the cholesterol monohydrate. Coming to the combined gallstones, they are usually solitary large stones. They have a pure gallstone nucleus. Either it could be a cholesterol bile pigment or a calcium carbonate, and it has an outer shell of mixed gallstone. So this has a nucleus which is made up of a pure gallstone surrounded by a shell of mixed gallstone. So based on the composition, there are three different types: pure, mixed gallstones and combined gallstones. Coming to the cholesterol stones, they are the most common ones. They are usually single, whitish yellow in color. They can be round or faceted with smooth glistening surface. The size varies from 1 to 4 centimeters and they are found more commonly in females. So this shows yellowish cholesterol stones inside the gallbladder. Pigment stones, again, they are multiple, jet black in color, they're irregular in shape, they have mulberry like external surface, and they're usually small and measure less than 1 centimeters across. So they're usually soft and can be easily crushed. They are often formed in a sterile gallbladder. The component of the pigment stones is calcium bilirubinate, bilirubin polymers, calcium salts, and mucin. So here you can see a gallbladder studded with multiple jet black pigment stones. So this table summarizes all the different types of the gallstones, their component composition, and the main gross appearance of these gallstones. So here again, the first one is a pure cholesterol gallstone, which is a large single stone which is with a smooth surface and yellowish white in color. The next one is the multiple jet black pigment stones, and third one is the calcium carbonate one, which is hard and whitish in color. There are again multiple. So these three form the pure gallstones. The next one is the mixed gallstone, which is multifaceted. Again, they have a multiple layers of made up of either cholesterol, pigments, and calcium, whereas the combined gallstone, you can see in the center, it has a nucleus of a pure gallstone surrounded by mixed outer shell of mixed gallstone. So coming to the clinical features and complications of gallstones, they remain asymptomatic, or sometimes they can present with biliary colic. So sometimes they can be diagnosed by chance during investigation for some other gallstones. So mixed and combined gallstones, they are usually accompanied by the chronic cholecystitis. So patient can they usually have they can progress to this chronic cholecystitis, and sometimes acute cholecystitis can occur when there is obstruction of the cystic duct by these gallstones, and this can be a most common reason for any emergency cholecystectomy. So patients with gallstones in the common bile duct, they develop pain and obstructive. They can develop pain and obstructive jaundice. And sometimes, if it is a large stone, it can directly erode into an adjacent loop of the small bowel, which in turn can give rise to intestinal obstruction, and this is called as a gallstone ileus. And also there is a small and doubtful risk of development of cancers in gallbladder in cases of cholelithiasis. So there is a small percentage of cases where it can predispose to the development of gallbladder carcinomas. So next complication is mucocele or hydrops of the gallbladder. This is nothing but distension of the gallbladder by clear watery mucinous secretion, which results from impacted stone in the neck of the gallbladder. So after the once there is obstruction, there will be abundant clear mucinous secretion which gets accumulated inside the gallbladder. So here the lumen of the dilated gallbladder is filled with clear mucus, and also it contains the cholesterol stones, and you can see the arrow points at a stone which is obstructing the cystic duct. So next, coming to the acute cholecystitis. So this is nothing but diffuse inflammation of the gallbladder, usually secondary to the obstruction of the gallbladder outlet or the like cystic duct by gallstones. So 90% of cases of acute cholecystitis are associated with presence of gallstones, or sometimes acalculous cholecystitis, that is without stone formation, can occur when there is associated underlying disorders like sepsis, infection of the gallbladder with Salmonella typhi, or in some cases of severe trauma. So coming to the gross appearance in case of acute cholecystitis, the gallbladder is distended and it is tense, and the serosal surface or the external surface of the gallbladder appears congested, and it can be covered by fibrinous exudate. The mucosa of the gallbladder is usually bright red, and the lumen may be filled with cloudy or turbid bile, which may contain large amount of fibrin, pus and hemorrhage. So when the lumen is filled with purulent exudate alone, then the condition is called as empyema of gallbladder. So in more severe cases of acute cholecystitis, the gallbladder can get transformed into a green-black necrotic organ when we term it as a gangrenous cholecystitis. And in another condition where there is invasion of gas-forming organisms, especially Clostridia and coliforms, it can give rise to an acute emphysematous cholecystitis. So these are the different varieties of acute cholecystitis. So coming to the microscopic appearance of acute cholecystitis, the wall of the gallbladder as such shows marked inflammation. There is inflammatory edema, congestion and neutrophilic exudate. So the main inflammatory cell here is the neutrophil. Apart from this, there may be frank abscess in the wall, and in severe cases there can be gangrenous necrosis with rupture into the peritoneal cavity. So this particular thing is called as gangrenous cholecystitis. Sometimes as a result of either delay in the diagnosis, the incidence of gangrene and perforation is much higher in case of acalculous acute cholecystitis than in calculous cholecystitis. So here is a picture showing gallbladder mucosa. It shows complete ulceration of the mucosa. There is lot of edema and infiltration by the acute inflammatory cell, that is the neutrophil. So clinically they can present with severe pain in the upper abdomen with features of peritoneal irritation. Acute calculous cholecystitis sometimes can be an acute surgical emergency which requires surgical cholecystectomy, whereas sometimes medical treatment itself can give rise to resolution and it can avoid risk of complications. So the complications of acute cholecystitis as such are perforation, biliary fistula, and sometimes it can give rise to recurrent attacks and adhesion formation. So I have listed few questions which are commonly asked from this chapter. So as a large essay, they can ask about etiopathogenesis and morphology of hepatocellular carcinoma, etiopathogenesis of cholelithiasis, morphology of different kinds of gallstones, and the complications. And short essays can be about cholecystitis or fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma, then the risk factors for gallstones, and name any 4 metastatic tumors of the livers, or even types of gallstones can be asked as a short question. Thank you.